Hey y'all. So, screenwriting tip number 5, I think. Seems like such a low number. So, anyway, I'm going to talk about like a lot of stuff because there is a lot of stuff, a lot of details, a lot of different angles, a lot of different ways to approach things, and all of them actually kind of occur simultaneously. So some of it will seem ticky-tacky to some of you, and some of you will be like, oh, that's interesting. And then for some of the more complex stuff, I'm still trying to figure out how to get into a longer format. You know, maybe I have a sort of like a podcast with like a friend here, and then we can bat the shuttlecock back and forth. But anyway, for the meantime, I'm going to say some things that will be valuable to some of you for sure. Others, maybe not so much. So today, I want to talk about prose and tone. This will only be about 5 minutes or so, maybe 6. So prose and tone. So I get, and this will go to a larger conversation, which I won't get into now, but, you know, I've had people ask me, how do you write action? I mean, do I describe it when he punches him in the ribs, etc.? I have an infinite number of thoughts about that and a lot of experience, to be honest with you. But I'm not going to get into that because that's deeper. That's one of the big platform conversations. But generally, I want to talk about prose, which will be very helpful to some of you going forward who are writing now. And you're starting out on your scripts, and you're like, well, how do I write prose? What is the proper way to write prose? Well, I'll tell you. Or what I believe anyway. Which is that, first of all, like any good piece of non-fiction, like if you read non-fiction books, the writer always stays slightly above you as the reader. Like, you're like, okay, this person is intelligent. They're intelligent, they're not stupid. Now, what I mean by that is, I don't mean to use big words or anything like that, but brevity is important, but it's not the most important thing. Brevity, clarity, impact. Like what you write, I mean, George Orwell's a good person to look at. He writes very briefly, but he writes with tremendous impact. This is important, I think. And also, one of my favorite writers, in fact, you know, my favorite writer of all time is Shane Black. And he broke the fourth wall all the time. He said, for instance, things sometimes, this bad guy lives in the house I'm going to live in when I sell this script. Okay, that's totally breaking the fourth wall. I would not recommend you do that, as much as I like Shane Black, because of 2 reasons. A, that's Shane Black, and B, it was a different era. Never break the fourth wall, because the entire point of prose is to create atmosphere. To create atmosphere and pacing. Sometimes you don't even need prose, but you need to give a pause in the dialogue. It cannot be achieved in any other way than saying, he looks at her with a growing anxiety in his eyes. That creates a mental pause in the audience's, or the reader's, a perception of what's going on. These things can be very important. But also, prose needs to be worded in such a way that it encapsulates the atmosphere of the room, or and I'm not going to go to action now because it's a whole different thing, but it encapsulates the molecular atmosphere of what you're feeling, whether it's dread or threat or fun, whatever it is. The prose needs to reflect that in the way it's written. If it's meant to be written in a sort of hard-boiled detective novel way, it needs to be written in that way. If it's meant to be written in a Jane Austen novelesque way, write it as if Jane Austen would write it. If it needs to be written as if Kurt Vonnegut wrote it, write it as if Kurt Vonnegut wrote it. This is very important because what you're doing is you're creating atmosphere. What will the director do if it's not you when they get hold of the movie? They will erase, the prose will not show up, but the atmosphere will reflect the prose, and the prose needs to create the atmosphere in the director or the reader's head. And the better you can create that atmosphere for them while they're reading it, the less likely it is they'll ever change it. Because once they see it, they're like baby ducks. They imprint on it. And or to a greater degree, the chance of what you wrote will actually show up more to the degree of what you originally thought it would be on screen. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I think I've hit my 6 minutes or so. So that is screenplay tip 6 or 5, something like that. Anyway, I'll see you next time. I have tons and tons and tons to say.